Before we begin, here's how to earn continuing professional education credit for attending this session. Gain valuable insights by attending the podcast, then complete the assessment test to download your certificate. To do this, follow these simple steps. Click on the link in your description to access the session. Create a free account and attend the podcast. After the podcast, take the assessment test and download your certificate. It's easy, and it's free. We highly recommend checking out our subscription. Let's get started.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the optimizing hardware and software. How important is it to optimize both hardware and software for CPAs, and what impact does it have?
Well, I think you hit something really important there. Many pieces of software can be run multiple ways.
Okay.
So if we want to go back to the Thompson stack for a little bit,
Yep.
their local version of document management or document archival is a program called File Cabinet.
Mm-hmm.
File Cabinet can run with it's called flat file backend, which is just a bunch of files on your computer, or it can run in a SQL server.
Okay.
Now, if you don't have a SQL server already and you're a smaller firm, that SQL server adds a $5,000 minimum cost to licensing.
Wow.
And if your database is larger than 60 gig, they recommend you go to SQL Server. The problem is that if you're running on standard disk, the SQL Server will be slightly faster. But if you run on flat files, you can restore individual files, not the whole database, individual drawers, not the whole database. So you have more flexibility in that. So better backups. And in addition, with the build we do with the low latency drive I was talking about originally from Fusion IO, we can run a 1 terabyte database faster with that flat file model. Then you can run it if you put it on a SQL server, even if the SQL server is independent, even if you put out a $15,000, $20,000 SQL server. And so where I'm going is you need to know how the program works and what you want to do with it. And then the hardware design and software choices come in.
Welcome to another episode of your favorite podcast, We're Trying to Figure Out with Saul, where we explore the journeys and insights of industry leaders shaping the future. Today, we have a special guest, Josh Holman, a seasoned information technology as a service thought leader for the CPA industry with over 3 decades of experience in the IT communication, accounting, and data management systems. Josh shares his expertise in addressing technical challenges, optimizing hardware and software, and improving overall efficiency in CPA firms. Josh, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Saul. It's good to be here.
Absolutely. Josh, can you start by giving us a brief overview of your background and how you became an IT as a service thought leader for the CPA industry?
Well, thanks, Saul. We used to do work for anybody who wanted it. So I could be at an art dealer one day, a construction company the next, a lawyer the third, and then an accountant after that. And, over the years, I worked with a fair number of accountants, and, the business comes and goes, there are flows. I ended up spending just a lot of time in that space. And one thing I noticed was that there are a lot of things that nobody gets about the accounting space. So after spending time there, I can tell you accountants in general take a lot more work than a lot of your other industries. But at the same time, if you're a specialist, if you focus on one industry, it doesn't take you any more work to be very good at one thing than to be pretty good at a whole lot of things. So we just kept doubling down until at this point, if you're not a CPA firm or EAs, we're not interested. Additionally, the software for accountants isn't great, and that's fine. They're not a big niche. But so many people miss that it's not about whose fault it is. It's about doing the best job you can with what you have. And that really has kept coming back to us again and again. And we saw all the things the generalists are doing, tons of reporting for no return on investment, tons of smoke and mirrors rather than the real work. And we decided, let's cut out everything that's without value, cut it to its base bones, and only help accountants.
Yeah. So, it's always curious to know because, when you must have started off, you must have never heard of anything like IT as a service, like that term itself.
No,
When did that happen? When did that wisdom come in?
we they had this thing in between called an MSP, or managed service provider, because
Okay.
back in the day, everybody was time and materials.
Okay.
And then you said, wait, um, the client would want you out the door as fast as possible because they saw you billing every minute you were there.
Yeah.
And at the same time, um, you were in a hard place because if you took the right approach and the extra time to fix something once, the client didn't like it. But if you did a band aid approach, you'd be back every month.
Mm-hmm.
So we moved on to a model that the whole industry did called a managed service provider, where there's a floor and everything below that floor is included for a set price per month. And that makes it a little easier to think long term, find a root cause, really fix a problem because the client's not seeing you as a cost center every time you're there.
Yeah.
And I think what people miss is there's a difference between what the MSPs are doing, which, like I said, has a lot of fluff, a lot of things that provide no value, but give you the illusion of value, and actually getting things done. And what you want is somebody who has the same goals you do.
Yeah.
So if you're an accountant, your goal is to just work all day and get the job done,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't want to think about your IT. If we do a good enough job on the front end setting it up, you don't need to call us, which means we can have more clients, which means we can have more revenue. So it's in all of our interest for you not to call us. And it's our job to do a good enough job that you don't need to. And with that move, it's really to the trusted advisor model. And I'd say IT as a service is a trusted advisor model for IT, where
Okay.
we're your whole IT department, we're your CIO, we're helping you with the planning, the whole works.
All right. Okay. That makes sense. What and is what inspired you to specialize in the IT solutions for specifically CPAs?
Well, I had a client who was a CPA, and when I came there, they were a small firm. And frankly, I, I got invited to the Christmas parties. My
Mm-hmm.
kids came and they were part of, they got to sit on Santa's lap and everything. So I was basically on staff. And way back, I was a sole proprietor.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know if people remember, but there was a time where we would get new PPC CDs every month, and we'd have to change them into a server with all the CD drives. If you put one in the wrong one, then none of the practice aids worked.
Uh-huh.
And so it goes that far back.
Uh-huh.
And just as I went through my experience in life, we ran into a problem with Thomson Reuters software.
Mm-hmm.
Their UltraTax would not print well or e-file well on large multi-state clients. And the real problem is a software error in their design. But that's fine. We sat there and we had everybody come out. Thomson sent out a company that's not around in the same name anymore, called Eccentric back in the day, to check us. And they said, you're just as fast as we are. Nobody's faster than this. This is how it is. And I had a partner who just kept getting on my shoulder and said, hey, there's got to be a better way.
Mm-hmm.
And so I spent about 2 weeks of benchmarking and testing until we found the problem with the software. And we figured out how to address that in hardware to get around the problem, because we told Thomson about the problem, and they're a little bigger. They're dealing with mostly small firms. They weren't really interested or worried about it. But the people who were interested about it were Thomson Enterprise Sales, because the guys who sell the firms of over 25 users cared because they were losing sales over the software being slow.
Yep.
So once we figured it out, they had me over to their Synergy conference as a speaker. We told people how to do it. We gave out the data for free for a while, and the data's still out there for free. We tell people how still, but people still couldn't get it done even after they were given the roadmap. Their IT company just said, "That's not the way that I've done it the last 20 years. I'm not going to change."
Mm-hmm.
And so there ended up being a real lucrative vertical to slide into where we can make a big difference for people. And frankly, it's been great for us because we're so efficient and effective that generally we're underpriced but making a higher margin than most of our competitors.
Absolutely. I mean, this is fantastic. This is really amazing. It's all about the opportunity, to identify a problem and then to capitalize on that opportunity. I guess you were like, the right man at the right place.
Yeah, it's amazing some of the larger companies, and this isn't to bash on Thomson. You run into the same thing with Wolters Kluwer. Intuit won't listen to you either. But you
Yeah.
come to them with a fix. I mean, I'd have a job, but I wouldn't have this one right now if they would have just put a fix in their software. But
Mhm.
I'm happy to take it from it, and from that, we've been able to expand and work with Wolters Kluwer, deal with the issues with Lacert, and just keep the whole, you know, a really nice niche in one industry.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, let's dive into the technical challenges CPAs face. Josh, what are some of the most common technical issues that CPAs encounter in their day-to-day operations?
I would say that there are two sides to the same coin.
Okay.
On one side, CPAs don't want to change. On the other side, they're seeing advertisements and groupthink and things that are on the news, and they're trying to jump for it. So then they get burned because they try to jump for something. And I think the biggest idea is for a CPA to tell themselves what they tell their clients. They tell their clients every day, "You need me. I'm a CPA, and I understand this, and I can make more money for you at the end of the year if you let me do your tax planning, if you let me help you with your estate, if you let me help you with all the high value planning pieces."
Mm-hmm.
Then, when it comes to IT, a lot of times they want to be in control.
Mm-hmm.
And they've got to tell themselves, wait a second, I want people to trust me. I think I'm good. Let me go find out somebody else that's good, give them some trust, and focus on this as a business issue, not a tech issue. And tech's a toolbox.
Mm-hmm.
We offer hosting. Everybody offers hosting. But we also offer self-hosted where you own your own equipment because there's a time where that is a better solution for the client.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just about what's best for us, it's about having the right relationships and being able to try to act almost as a fiduciary, really as a trusted advisor, and say what's best for the client.
Absolutely.
And to
Absolutely.
do that, you need to be able to grab the right tools.
Yep.
I would say that a company under 5 users, you're going to want to just go with your provider. If it's Thomson, there's a lot of reasons to go with virtual office or software as a service. We all know they're not high performing pieces. Same with CCH Access. They're not great, but they've got a price point. You get a little bigger, you want to host with somebody who's going to host for you because financially that makes you're moving from capex to opex and you're paying less over the life of the equipment.
Yep.
You get to 15 to 20 users and you need to have a discussion. How does my business change if I host my own or have somebody else host it? Because it's no longer a financial discussion. Financially, you're better off owning your own equipment and hosting it. But how does that affect your planning? How does that affect your day to day?
Absolutely.
And so the big problem is being able to look at a toolbox and know what tool to pick up.
Yep. 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 Oh, that's interesting. Very, very beautifully laid out, Josh, very beautifully laid out. And I'm sure that you have a lot of stories to tell in this space, but I wouldn't really want to know all, but like, could you share a specific example of a technical problem you had encountered and how you solved it?
Well, the one that we put, we've had several, but the one that we have actually published, and we did a publish with SanDisk, which you may have heard of. They got bought by
Yes.
Western Digital, but it was a Korean company. When we went with the Thomson software and we were dealing with this problem, we had a client that was in all 50 states plus DC. It was a national lender. And every time they went to print preview, and accountants, the software doesn't work where you can just read through it, go one and done, and print once at the end. You're print previewing a couple times a day, you're double checking forms. It was taking over 30 minutes to print preview. And that's when we had Thomson out, had Eccentric out. They looked at it, and again, they said, there's no way to be faster. So I took the biggest, fastest computer we had with a ton of RAM and a very fast processor, and brought everything local off the network. We had the same problem. Eventually, this is getting a little technical, but I set up a thing called a RAM disk, which is temporary storage in your memory.
Yep.
And it runs about 100 times as fast as your regular storage.
Yep.
And I put the files on there, and we got down to 3 minutes from 30. And so this was a very specific case, only for your complicated clients. But we wondered, this is on this big $3,000 computer, it should handle anything. So we took an $800 Surface first generation, if you remember those. It's a little tablet, it has no power behind it. And we set up the RAM disk on it and got the same result.
Wow.
And that proved that everybody who was saying you need more expensive computers, you need more memory, was missing the boat. The bottleneck with Thomson was on storage.
Okay.
And at the time, we had a very expensive storage set. It's called a SAN. The standard is, for a lot of server people, is what they call a 221, two servers, two switches, and a SAN.
Yep.
And we found that that was the bottleneck, that your $20,000 storage system made your system run poor, where an $800 laptop could run it significantly better. And so we did a lot of research to see how we could find the best solution. And at the time, there was a company called Fusion.io that was started by Steve Wozniak of Apple. And they had the fastest available storage at the time. And so we put one card in the server, put the files on that card, and cut 90% of the time for all of our print previews and e-files on large multi-hour e-files, dropped to 10, 15 minutes. And it made a big difference in the way people worked. And that's our big one. If I can give you a second one that's not quite as technical. We used to have, you would watch them, admin people standing at the copier all day, every day during season.
Yeah.
I brought in a large high capacity copier, and they said, how are you going to pay for that? And I showed them how many pages we printed, how much it cost per page. I was able to pay for it in cost per page. Now, the firm I was at the time would pay overtime every year, and so the admin guys would get about 500 hours each of time and a half overtime every year. The year we put that in, we dropped 6 people to 0 overtime.
Do you want to earn CPE credit? Take this course of My CPE to earn free credit. Click the link in the description to get started.
Wow.
Because they were waiting on the copier, not the copier waiting on them.
Nice.
And that's where you have to think first, what's my business? What am I trying to get done? And have a business discussion, not a tech discussion. Because you bring in a copier that costs 4 times as much as the ones you have, people think, oh, that's a lot of money. That's foolish. But you save, your admins start going home at 5 o'clock instead of 9 o'clock all the way through tax season. You save a lot more in that overtime.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's all about, perceiving that opportunistic gain, to have that perspective. And, it's great example that you put forward. And, I'm sure you would be coming across somebody who would be coming you persistently, so if somebody were to came to you, if a CPA were to came to you facing persistent IT challenges, what initial steps do you recommend for a CPA to take if he's facing persistent IT challenges?
Well, the first is be detailed.
Uh-huh.
come back, maybe even take a stopwatch a little bit and say, what is it I'm doing? Because some challenges you resolve with hardware, some with software, and some with process.
Mm-hmm. Well
And
said.
then once you know what you're doing,
Mm-hmm.
then double check what is your goal.
Yep.
If your goal is to produce, 10 bound financial statements, and you're doing it by hand with hand collating and a spiral bind, depending upon how much you do that, that may be able to be all done completely in Acrobat,
Mm-hmm.
collated in Acrobat, and then one print and come off the copier bound, giving you the flexibility to turn a afternoon project into a 5-minute print right before the client walks in the door.
Absolutely. And you brought out a very interesting point. The hardware, the software, or the process. It's
Yes.
it's either one of these or a combination of whichever it may be. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the optimizing hardware and software. How
Sure.
important is it to optimize both hardware and software for CPAs, and what impact does it have?
Well, I think you hit something really important there. Many pieces of software can be run multiple ways.
Okay.
So if we want to go back to the Thomson stack for a little bit,
Yep.
their local version of document management or document archival is a program called File Cabinet.
Mm-hmm.
File Cabinet can run with it's called flat file backend, which is just a bunch of files on your computer,
Mm-hmm.
or it can run in a SQL server.
Okay.
Now, if you don't have a SQL server already and you're a smaller firm, that SQL server adds a $5,000 minimum cost to licensing.
Wow.
And if your database is larger than 60 gig, they recommend you go to SQL Server. The
Mm-hmm.
problem is that if you're running on standard disk, the SQL Server will be slightly faster. But if you run on flat files, you can restore individual files, not the whole database, individual drawers, not the whole database. So you have
Yep.
more flexibility in that. So better backups. And in addition, with the build we do with the low latency drive I was talking about originally from Fusion IO,
Mm-hmm.
we can run a 1 terabyte database faster with that flat file model than you can run it if you put it on a SQL server, even if the SQL server is independent, even if you put out a $15,000, $20,000 SQL server. And so where I'm going is you need to know how the program works and what you want to do with it. And then the hardware design and software choices come in. And that's so it really always comes down to backing up and really figuring out your goal. Then you find the best way to get there.
Absolutely. Now I'm going to take a little bit of your wisdom, and probably you might want to break this down a little bit into layman's terms as well. But when we talk about backup and data, there's always this term that I hear often: data latency. And a lot
Yes.
of people probably don't even know what it is. They might be encountering it, but they just don't know that this is what is causing it. So could you explain the concept of data latency and why it's crucial for performance?
Certainly. To know latency, you have to understand throughput. There are two different things.
Okay.
Latency is how long it takes to get a piece of data.
Okay.
And so when you're on a phone call, you want low latency because you can't have a whole sentence and then have the whole sentence pop over. Every sound matters.
Yep.
Okay. And throughput is how much data can come out at once.
Gotcha.
And most IT companies sell throughput
Mm-hmm.
because it's very simple. This is very fast. It has, X gigabits of throughput.
Mm-hmm.
And the way I put it is that if you're filling up a glass of water, you want to just go over to the fridge and put it in there and have the water come out immediately. If you
Mm-hmm.
put it at the end of a fire hose, somebody unscrews that and you see it take 20 seconds while the hose fills up with water, and then you get hit. The
Yep.
fire hose is much faster, has much more water, but it has much higher latency.
Yes. 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 Very, very, very well explained. Very well explained. Because I thought, until I didn't know it, I thought that, well, isn't it simple? If it's like, if I were to look at it as an opening from where the water is coming, I thought the throughput was the opening from where the water is coming or from where the data is coming. Larger the opening, more you get the data coming in, but, takes a while for you to realize it.
You
And
only need so much data at a time.
yeah, yeah.
And so to put a slightly different analogy on it, if you had to go to Starbucks for a cup of coffee for each person in the office, yeah, it would make sense to drive a car and carry them all at once. But the problem is the software is only going to do one order at a time.
Yeah,
So if you could only carry one cup at a time, a big, tractor trailer is not going to get you any more than a bike.
absolutely. Absolutely. And when we talk about data, I guess for CPAs, not only is accessing the data important, but I guess the backup and security is also critical for,
Yes.
so, but, I would still, but then there's also this other term that people hear, or they may have heard of, but they probably need some clarity. There is data redundancy, and then there is backup in data management.
Yes.
Could you break that out for us?
So let's start with backups before we move to security, because
Yes.
those are important to be separate. When you have backups, you have two types of backups. You have a disaster recovery backup, which is if something bad happened to everything, but you also want a long-term backup so that if somebody overwrote a return last summer while they were doing a projection, you can get that one return back. So
Yep.
when we're talking backup, we're talking those two things. The building catches on fire, you get a virus, you accidentally delete the whole thing, the whole drawer, the whole folder, fine. But you also need that historical backup.
Yep.
Um, Everybody has a slightly different design on this, but every design is essentially I need something I can get to quickly, I need something long term that's safe, and I need a way to get the individual files.
Yep.
So in our model, we hold everybody's files in four places. There's the production active file you work in.
Yep.
There's the disaster image from the night before that's on site. There's a disaster image that's off site. Now that image may be a couple days back because, excuse me, it takes time to send the whole image off site.
Yep.
And then finally, there's that historical backup that lets you have multiple versions of the same file so you can get the right one.
Okay.
And that's how our model's built.
Okay.
One backup in the same building, one backup in a different building, the live data, and a file-based backup that's across multiple data centers.
Interesting.
And I think a lot of people follow similar designs, but it's important that you make sure that you have those four copies because each one's to protect from a different thing. The data center copy, the historical backup is for people damaging data that you may not know about for a long time. The offsite copy is for failure in your building. This is very rare, but we're talking a fire, a storm, something like that. The on-site copy is for failure of your physical device or virus or anything like that, and then there's what you work with.
Absolutely. And I guess it's also the point of, how you're accessing the data, because like the recent Windows fiasco that happened because of that, Falcon CrowdStrike issue, like the PCs were not working. I didn't really think that, there could be an alternate to that, I mean, they didn't foresee it,
I think that we've moved into a world that is really defined by change.
Yep.
And it's also defined by loss of control.
Yep.
When I started working, we would get a box of CDs every month from Microsoft. We would go to our clients, we would look at how their system was running, we would see if there was a reason for the update, and we would only put on the updates that were necessary.
Okay.
And that gave you a very solid, secure system.
Okay.
Today's world, Microsoft rolls out whatever updates they want, whenever they want, in, for instance, Office all the time. And you can see more failures in updates sometimes than in what they're trying to avoid.
Yep.
So if you have a solid system, it used to be you had to justify an update, and now we've gotten very almost lazy. Throw everything on there regardless. You're never going to get fired for putting on an update, so just do it versus actually knowing what you're doing for your client. We
Okay.
believe in updates, we think they're important, but we also make sure that we minimize the risk from that because CrowdStrike wrote an update. It was an extra piece of security. It was wrong, and it cost companies tons of money. People were down for over a week in some cases. Um, and when all the airlines went down, there was one airline that was on time, and it was Southwest that everybody made fun of because they hadn't modernized their ticketing system in 12 years.
Access latest and trending CPE courses with my CPE's Unlimited Access subscription. Subscribe now.
Oh my God, I didn't know that. I mean,
Yeah.
that's interesting. Well,
So I'm not saying if it's not broke, don't fix it. There's reasons to move forward,
yeah.
but you should always be thinking, not just blindly doing anything.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. In fact, no, I tell this, I happen to have this discussion because I remember when I was working for this organization, it was a talent acquisition organization, but the IT guy was so smart that just like you would say that, like you would actually determine whether this update is needed or not, because he knew what that update is going to do and he would make a determination whether this is required and if it's required for who and all that, which is, I mean, people would say it's paranoid, but then when you look at it in the long run, I think that was a very solid strategy. And this brings me to the point of security, because backing up data is one thing, but ensuring security that you're not just accessing it anyway is another.
Well, let me go ahead and take a contrarian stance to the standard about security for a minute.
Uh-huh.
We hear all the time about how important VPNs are.
Uh-huh.
Security is a layered approach. It's
Uh-huh.
not just your antivirus software, it's not just your VPN.
Uh-huh.
And so instead of doing what most people do now, which is install something and turn everything on so everybody has every capability possible, you should be doing what we used to do back, way back, and what we do, and have to justify everything that's open, have everything possible off. That way you have access to do everything you want to do your job, but you know what decisions you've made. And we hear about VPNs all the time because it's a great way to take your computer, connect it to your office network, and make sure that now your computer's in the building securely. But what people miss is a VPN gives full access to that network, most VPNs people use, to that computer. So what you've just done is taken a potential attack vector and given it full access to your network. So now every computer that connects is completely inside the network. It can get data. And you want to ask yourself, how many times do you want to let a machine have access to data where it can do what it wants automatically without a user forcing it to?
Wow. Wow.
And
That's
once you
some
start
question.
thinking that way,
Mm-hmm.
a VPN is about the biggest security threat you can have. It's kind of like taking all the doors off your file room.
Yeah. I mean, but how about if we just implemented a two-factor authentication when, would that not be okay? Like,
Well, the problem isn't getting connected to the VPN. You can have the two-factor authentication. The thing is, once you're connected, that computer has full access to the building. It's just like if somebody
wow.
took a computer and plugged it in. So
Mm-hmm.
now, if that computer's already been compromised, you've given everybody who has access to that computer access into the system. Whereas if you're working off of a published application and you've done several other security things to lock things down, that computer has no access. And you could actually take an infected computer, connect and do work on it, and be safer than you would going through a VPN with a computer that you don't know if it's infected or not.
Absolutely, absolutely. And with the thing and the way the things are unfolded with this the Windows issue that happened, a lot of people have now started talking about drafting a technical plan for recovery and a business plan. I mean, I hear, I don't know whether they're synonymous or not. There's a technical plan, there's a business plan. I don't know. Are they the same or are they different? What is the difference?
There are, well, a business continuity plan should include the technical plan as well as who to contact, where you're going to go, things like are you going to rent secondary space if you're much larger for your staff to come in? And there are even companies that help you with that can do things like drop two shipping containers outside your office that have room for 20 desks each, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So there's companies out there to do that. But what's really important for CPAs is that they realize they're already legally required to have a WISP,
Yes,
and it's your
yes.
information security plan. Now,
Written
the WISP
information
doesn't
plan.
have much tech in it,
Mm-hmm.
but it does say who's responsible for what and how are you working.
Yep.
And then we provide those to all our clients because the last thing we want is a client to say, I didn't know and be in the middle of it. It's easier to do the work. So we do it for free. But next to that, there's an IRS Form 4557 protecting your client's personal data.
Yep.
And we think that every firm needs to have gone through that form. We have our set of answers to the form that answer based on our design that
Mm-hmm.
we provide as well. But if you're not running with the WISP, you're illegal. And if you're not running with the 4557, um, man, I don't know what word I can say that doesn't have a high negative connotation, but you're not doing your job. And
Oh
so
my
you really
God.
need to have both of those. And if your IT provider or your internal staff isn't helping you get there or hasn't already provided that, you need to take a look inside and say, how do we get to the right place? What else are we missing?
Well, Josh, you seem to know this like the back of your hand. I'm totally impressed with what you're saying. And I would really love to know your take on the modern technology solutions like AI and automation, which are, like transforming the industry. But, you know, how do you perceive the technological challenges when we're adopting these into the profession?
So if we can talk about AI for a minute, it's not new.
Okay.
We used to call it big data,
Yeah.
and it's still out there. And there have been providers that would let you upload an entire ledger. And when you're doing an audit, instead of randomly picking, they would verify everything.
Mm-hmm.
And then they would tell you what to go look at. And so there are going to be built in pieces. My take would be look at this not as a savior, but as another tool.
Okay. Okay.
I use ChatGPT multiple times a day, every day.
Mm-hmm.
I use it because I make typos. I use it because I want information, and sometimes you can think of it like Wikipedia. You were never allowed to write a paper off of Wikipedia in school,
Yep.
but you were allowed to look at Wikipedia to find the sources you wanted to use.
Yep.
It's
Yep.
the same thing. Yes, it lies. That's called a hallucination. Yes, it makes mistakes, but it can help you get to the right place. So use it as a tool. Don't trust it. Realize that it keeps some of the data, so don't get any PII inside of it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's actually, believe it or not, Adobe's integrated it into Acrobat now,
Yep.
so that you can open a PDF file and just say, "Tell me the highlights," and it will.
Yep. Yep.
You could do that with ChatGPT 6 months ago. So it's everywhere and it's ubiquitous. But it's kind of like when we first started with spreadsheets in the early 80s.
Mm-hmm.
It can help you be a better you, but you still have to double check it and work on it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Everything has got pros and cons. So far, I mean, what you rightly mentioned, I think I just want to emphasize on that fact which you just mentioned that, don't share personal identifiable information into these
Yes.
softwares. That's very important. Because I'm not quite sure, even I don't really know how the large language model interprets it and how it can pick it up. I mean, I've seen videos wherein AI is like, I don't know where you are, but it can give me recommendations. So it somehow has information, but I'm not quite sure, But you want to probably like touch a little bit more on that, let them know why they should not do that.
Oh, certainly. So when you work on an AI, it's learning, and it's learning from your data.
Mm-hmm.
And if one of the bigger firms, if EY decides, or Pricewaterhouse, they want their own AI, they're going to build it in-house. The data will stay in-house.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're using ChatGPT, it's learning how to think by what you're giving it.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, there may be a time where the data you've used is available to somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think people miss it though that Gmail has always been at some level in the same way. You
Mm-hmm.
don't necessarily own all your data.
Yep.
So you need to think when you're getting something for free, when you're using something on the internet, somebody's making money. Who is it and how much do you trust them? And PII should be always held very close to the vest.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'd also add the data is already out there in most cases. The IRS themselves has been hacked, there have been breaches all over.
Mm-hmm.
But what you really want to do is protect your firm and make sure that if somebody got it, that you can do everything possible to prove it wasn't that they got it from. Just
Rightly
to
said.
give the extra piece there, because just because you're secure doesn't mean everybody is.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's true. It's true. And I guess that because you rightly said, you're feeding it all in. If anybody were to have access to the machine which you're using for ChatGPT, then all you gotta do is just put in some right prompts, and you could have all the information.
Right.
That's lethal. That's lethal. So I guess everybody would want to know, like how to keep this. How should I say it's safe? So, if you could provide some practical advice for our listeners, Josh, what practical tips do you have for
Certainly.
the CPA firms?
You can use ChatGPT to do something as difficult or time consuming as organize a credit card statement.
Okay.
But when you copy and paste the credit card statement in, if you say to ChatGPT, this client was on vacation from March 7th to 14th, or was traveling from March 7th to 14th. I'd like you to separate out all those expenses, sort them, and list the ones that you believe are business expenses. Then you open it up in Acrobat, highlight it, copy and paste. Don't grab the whole page. Don't be lazy and drag a whole PDF in. Highlight the part in the middle with the data and move it over. That doesn't have a client name. It doesn't have any PII in it. And then you can still get the benefit without the risk.
Absolutely. Like you rightly said, don't be lazy.
Yeah. Nobody wants to hear it, but I think that's our motto over here. Every time that I end up wishing I hadn't done something, it's because I didn't take the extra steps. So we really focus on take the extra time, do it right now. Don't get caught with it later.
All right. And I would just like to know, like because I mean, there was a time where a lot of people were bothered with ransomware and
Huh?
like a cyber attack and everything, and that's when people become a little bit cognizant that, oh, I need to ensure that the data
Right.
is safe, it's secure, but I guess the term that I didn't hear anybody say was recoverable.
Well, it is very lucrative to sell safety,
Yes.
but there's a point of diminishing returns. I always tell people that we can make you secure, but we can never make it where Tom Cruise can't break in and take it. It's so when we look at this, we want to be diligent in our security. We want to make good security choices, but you want to always assume you're going to be hit, and you want to design and plan from day one
Mhm.
based on recovery.
Yep. Yep.
And
Yep.
so ransomware has been 100% about recovery from day one, and everybody who's gotten hit had one of two problems. Either they did not have a good backup, or they set up their backup in a very lazy way where it was accessible from the server it was backing up in the first place. And if today's designs, where we have what's called virtualization, which means we can hide servers from each other as one of the benefits, if you set up your backups correctly, there's no way for a computer that can damage a server to be able to damage the backup.
Interesting. Interesting. Well, I'm not an IT whiz, so, I wouldn't want to know more about that. But I would definitely love to know, because you've been in this industry for 3 decades now. You've seen the industry grow and where the industry is today. What future trends do you foresee in this intersection of technology and accounting?
Well, I'd say the first trend I see is more demographic. We don't have enough people coming into the profession.
Yes. Yes.
And we also have currently a mass exodus because of the baby boomers retiring.
Yep.
What that's done is made the supply of firms huge and the demand of labor huge, but the demand for firms is low. So, we've seen people who were hoping to get, $2, $3 per dollar billed, dropping down to getting 75 cents on the dollar on a audit practice. And we've seen a lot of large companies gobbling up the smaller ones. Where I'm going with this is where AI and good IT is so important, because it'll help you get through the short-term high demand for new staff.
Yep.
Because new staff can't, if you can't find them and you can't hire them, you got to figure something out. And so whether we talk about some of the outsourcing with things like SurePrep, whether we talk about some of the options with AI to do some of the prep work for you that you're working on, those will help us get past that short-term problem.
Yep.
But then long-term, we've got to realize where the value in the industry is. It's not in the commodity work. It's not in the tax returns. It's in the tax planning. It's in the business planning. It's in being business consultants.
Yep.
And so you can't just put your head down and nose to the grindstone anymore. You've got to provide that higher value, because the computers are doing a better job every day, and they're coming to take the boring work away from you, which is actually really exciting. You should be in a place where you get to do more of the fun stuff.
Well, you're the second person I'm hearing say this today. I spoke to another gentleman earlier today, and he said the same thing, because a lot of people think that AI is going to replace you. No, it's not here to replace you, but rather it's here to take care of the boring stuff so you can focus on more innovative and interesting stuff,
It also is going to change your training.
Yep.
Because you're not going to have as many first years coming.
Yep.
And AI is not going to have as much work for first years.
Mm-hmm.
So your first years might start doing a first review as opposed to the grunt work, and you might have an extra review in it, but how else are you going to train them? And maybe they catch some of the glaring problems that come out in that. So there's some value there.
Yep. Yep.
But
Yep.
yeah, so.
Okie dokie. All right. So, as we are coming towards the end, Josh, and thank you for sharing your insights today. But before we wrap up, do you have any final thoughts on the future of IT solutions in the accounting industry?
I do. I think that what we're talking about coming into accounting has already happened to IT.
Okay.
You don't hear about people who want to get into IT anymore. They want to get into software development. They want to get into coding.
Yep.
And IT has matured to where the commoditized portions of it are really going away.
Okay.
So what you get from an IT company now should be on the value side.
Okay.
And the years of the traditional IT guy who's coming in and plugging in the computer to help you get a projector up
Mm-hmm.
are no longer economically viable.
Yep.
You might pay a very high premium for that. And in our experience working with clients, they might pay more for that warm body than they would pay for a team to support them at a high end.
Yep.
And so it's just important to realize it's changing, and the values out there, but some of the luxuries aren't anymore because there's just no way for anybody to afford it.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Josh. Josh, this has been a delight. I cannot thank you enough for taking this time to also break down some complicated jargons. So thank you. Thank you so much, Josh, for this great discussion. And as we come to the end, to our listeners, stay tuned for more episodes of We're Trying to Figure Out with Saul. Until next time, keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible. Cheers.
Access latest and trending CPE courses with my CPE's Unlimited Access subscription. Subscribe now.